This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Ukraine still the focus at NATO, but Indo-Pacific partners, including Japan and South Korea, also set to be welcomed at the summit in Washington, D.C. We'll discuss the message their presence is sending to China. Taiwan reports a Chinese aircraft carrier passing near the Philippines en route to Pacific drills, accompanied by dozens of warplanes. And torrential rains wreak havoc across East Asia, including South Korea and Japan, triggering record floods, landslides, and transport chaos. And Samsung striking union workers making good on a threat, extending their walkout indefinitely to force the world's biggest memory chip maker to cave in to demands for higher pay. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, Beijing and Manila accusing each other of causing damage to coral reefs in the South China Sea. Where is the ongoing dispute between these two powers headed? We'll speak to our Beijing correspondent and an expert. Also ahead, we delve into the stress levels of teachers in East Asia, a region known for its highly competitive education system. Our correspondents who have been closely following the issue will share their insights. Today marks the second day of the NATO summit in Washington as the military alliance commemorates its 75th anniversary. Well, the group is expected to deepen its relations with its Indo-Pacific partners, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, all of which will be attending the summit in Washington. The talks are being closely watched by China as the alliance seeks to bolster its influence outside of the West. The summit has so far focused on Russia's war in Ukraine as Beijing and Moscow deepen ties in recent months. Well, U.S. President Joe Biden made a forceful pledge to defend Ukraine against Russia's war at the opening of the summit, in a bid to boost confidence in his ability to run for office again after his poor presidential debate showing against Donald Trump just a few weeks ago. President Biden called the alliance stronger than ever, highlighting that Ukraine can stop Russia with NATO's ongoing support.
But make no mistake, Ukraine can and will stop Putin. Especially with our full collective support. And they have our full support.
And for more, we are joined now by Nick Harper, reporting to us live from Washington, D.C. So, Nick, what is on the agenda on day two? What can we expect to be discussed today?
Well, things really getting underway during the course of today's proceedings. In many ways, Tuesday evening, when we had that ceremony to mark the 75th anniversary of the NATO alliance, that was all about looking back at what the alliance has done. Wednesday's proceedings will be very much looking forward at what the alliance will be able to do over the coming years. And as you mentioned, undoubtedly, Ukraine is going to remain the focus. The opportunity really is for the allies to show that they have that forceful support, as President Biden mentioned during his speech, forceful support for Ukraine. But it's also trying to work out concrete steps, things that would actually benefit and help Ukraine above and beyond just those words of support. So they'll be discussing a path to membership. They will not be offering full membership to NATO during the course of this summit. But it's working out how Ukraine can continue the reforms that it's taking place at this moment within its own country, those reforms that it needs to make in order to be able to join the alliance in the coming months. But then on top of that, it's also looking at physical things like air defences. We had a promise of 5 extra air defence systems for Ukraine overnight. The United States, Netherlands, Italy, Romania, Germany, all getting involved in helping to supply those. We'll likely hear additional pledges of money, humanitarian aid, but also ammunitions and weapons as well, including those shoulder-mounted Stinger missiles. Ukraine, of course, has asked for more. It's asked for 7 air defence systems, those 5 perhaps falling slightly short of what it would want. But NATO was also going to talk about strengthening its own alliance, the individual countries being urged to do what it can to strengthen their industrial bases so that they're able to match the might of Russia. On top of all of that, we'll also have a slightly lighter event in the evening, a dinner being hosted by Joe Biden at the White House, a moment perhaps for some levity after a day of what undoubtedly will be some very serious discussions.
And Nick, this summit no doubt will be closely watched by China, given that NATO's 4 Indo-Pacific partners are attending the summit. So what do you think the signal the alliance is trying to send out here?
I think it's really one of strength that those allies are here in Washington, D.C., not part of NATO, but an extension of NATO. Of course, the unsaid fear is that China could potentially do to Taiwan what Russia has done to Ukraine, that we could see an invasion in the coming years. So it's really about the alliance trying to show that they have that additional support and cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, that they have eyes on that area of the world while they're also focused on Europe. And it's therefore trying to provide that deterrence to China to make moves on Taiwan, trying to show that there is that strength of partnership in the Indo-Pacific. And I think we'll hear much of that over the next 2 days, that the alliance has New Zealand, Australia, Japan, South Korea waiting in the wings to try and strengthen that alliance of allies in the Indo-Pacific as well. But also we're likely to hear some discussion about China's role in the war in Ukraine. There is concern here in Washington from those leaders that China is continuing to show support in terms of words, but also actions, with physical weaponry being sent to Russia to help it in its war with Ukraine. So certainly concern, certainly China very much at the back of everyone's minds as they discuss those issues here in Washington.
Well, many thanks for that report, Nick Harper, speaking to us live from Washington, D.C. Taiwan's defense ministry reported that the Chinese aircraft carrier, the Shandong, passed near the Philippines en route to drills in the Pacific Ocean. Dozens of warplanes were also detected flying to join the vessel for the exercises. Taiwan's military says the aircraft carrier did not take the usual route through the Bashi Channel. Instead, it went further south via the Baitang Channel. Well, that waterway is situated between the Philippines' Batanes and Babuyan Islands. The maneuver comes during a period of rising tensions between Beijing and Manila over territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Manila has called on, quote, parties to adhere to international law's norms in response to Chinese military activities near the Philippine territory. The Southeast Asian nation's armed forces also emphasized the importance of keeping peace and stability in the region. Taiwan says that some 36 aircraft were detected flying towards the Pacific to carry out the drills with the Shandong. And this includes J-16 fighters and nuclear-capable H-6 bombers. Taipei says it will maintain vigilant monitoring of Chinese military activities. Meantime, Taiwanese President William Lai has met with Raymond Green, the U.S. de facto ambassador to the island. Both officials emphasized their nation's strong bilateral partnership. Well, the U.S. diplomat also reaffirmed America's commitment to support Taiwan's ability to defend itself.
首先，也是最重要的是，美国会持续大力支持台湾自我防御能力。我们对台湾海峡的和平与稳定有着共同而且长远的利益，这对印太地区还有全球的安全与繁荣极大重要。美国将继续支持台湾，这也符合美国长久以来以台湾关系法、3个联合公报和6项保证为指导的一种政策。
台湾和美国是彼此坚实的伙伴，积极维护区域的和平稳定发展。面对中国一再挑战，并试图改变台海现状，台湾作为国际社会负责任的一员，将致力维持现状，也会跟美国及理念相近国家密切合作，为区域的繁荣发展奉献心力。
Well, it's time now for your business update with none other than Olivia Marzuki, standing by for the very latest on Samsung's strike. What's happening now? It's indefinite, right?
Well, it's not stopping anytime soon. So apparently, Samsung union workers have extended their strike indefinitely from a 3-day stoppage plan initially. They're now pressing harder for their demands around wages and work conditions. And the extension is an attempt to force the management to negotiate. More than 5,000 members stopped working on Monday for a strike that was meant to end today. The National Samsung Electronics Union says it has decided to continue striking because the management has shown no indication of holding talks. It says it has more than 30,000 members. That's about a quarter of Samsung's workforce in South Korea. The world's largest maker of memory chips and smartphones employs nearly 260,000 staff globally. And it says that there's no immediate disruption to production. But the union claims there has been clear disruption in output. The strike is the biggest labor action in the tech giant's history and steps up pressure on the chip makers' management, who last week predicted a huge jump in second quarter operating profit. And then checking out Samsung's share price today, which trading mostly lower before closing flat, but so far this year, it has gained more than 10%. Latest price data out of China shows demand remaining weak, and this could fuel calls for more government support. June consumer inflation edged up 0.2% from a year earlier, falling short of expectations. Price growth also slowed compared to May. China emerged from a period of deflation in February, but prices have grown at a modest rate, in contrast to other major economies. Beijing has sought to revive consumption after a stuttering post-COVID recovery. However, concerns linger over more fundamental issues, including a protracted housing downturn and job insecurity. And Chinese consumers are getting rattled by another food-related bombshell. A scandal over the handling of cooking oil has reignited concerns over food safety in China. An investigative report by the state-backed Beijing News uncovered the, quote, open secret of cost-saving methods that shipping companies use. And the report said shippers use the same tanker vessels to transport food materials such as cooking oil and syrup as the ones for chemicals and petrols without any cleaning. In the spotlight is a major state-owned company, Sinograin, that's named as one of those implicated in the practice. The State Council's Food Safety Commission is currently looking into the matter. While experts rebuke such misconduct, they also highlight the difficulties industry players face in staying profitable if they have to change their practices. Well, the scandal sent shares of top cooking oil supplier Ehai Kerry to plunge by more than 8% at one stage in Shenzhen to a record low, and the stock managed to pare some of those losses at closing. And its parent company, Singapore-listed Wilmar International, ended flat. The world's largest contract chip maker, TSMC, reported strong growth in its quarterly revenue, beating market expectations. The surge comes as demand booms for AI applications. Now, second quarter revenue this year came in at almost $21 billion. That is a 32% on-year jump compared with about $16 billion in the same period in 2023. TSMC, whose customers include Apple and NVIDIA, has benefited from a spike in demand for AI. That has helped the chipmaker weather the slowing in pandemic-led demand and also push its share price to a record high. It also briefly entered the elite club of companies valued at more than $1 trillion on Monday. Shares of TSMC rose about 0.5% today, taking their gains so far this year to around 76%. Now, East Asian markets ending mixed today after the U.S. Fed chief hinted that the central bank would cut interest rates this year. However, he did not give a clear time frame. Now, Japan's Nikkei 225 is the region's top performer, scaling a record high, topping the 41,800 level. And the Kospi is mostly flat, while the TAIEX closed about 0.5% higher. In contrast, the Greater China markets decline. That's after the latest inflation data showing consumer demand staying anemic. And Shanghai losing about 0.7%. Shenzhen is slightly down, while the Hang Seng is in the red by nearly 1/3%. That's all I have in business. I'll tell you. Back to you.
Well, till tomorrow. Thanks very much, Olivia. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Beijing releases a second marine environment report on the South China Sea amid an escalating row with the Philippines. We'll have our Beijing correspondent and an analyst join us to examine China's latest claims. China has released a report claiming that the area around the Scarborough Shoal that it controls in the disputed South China Sea is of excellent environmental quality. And this comes as tensions have escalated following skirmishes with the Philippines in recent months. China seized the Scarborough Shoal in 2012 following a standoff with the Philippines. Well, this report by the Chinese Ministry of Ecology and Environment is the second related to the South China Sea that China has released in a week. The findings are based off on-site investigations carried out by a 20-member team between May and June this year. The report also stated that the coral reef ecosystem in the area was of healthy status. And for more analysis, we are joined now by CNA correspondent Olivia Seong in Beijing, as well as Lai Liangfuk, Senior Fellow at the ICES Yusof Ishak Institute. Well, thank you both for joining us. First to you, Olivia. I recall that you reported earlier this week on another report that's also related to the South China Sea that was released by China. So can you just give us the big picture perspective here? What message do you think China is trying to convey with all these reports?
I'll tell you, the message is not explicit. It does need a little bit of deciphering, but I think the message is pretty clear. China is pointing its finger at the Philippines. It says it's the Philippines that is at fault when it comes to environmental damage in the disputed South China Sea. And if we were to compare these two reports from two different Chinese ministries that have been released this week, let's first talk about where they are similar. Both of them are talking about environmental impact in the South China Sea, also in areas that have become regular flashpoints in recent times as this dispute in the South China Sea goes on between China and the Philippines, namely with regard to the area near the Scarborough Shoal and the Second Thomas Shoal. Where is different, though, is the assessment that has been reached and the conclusion from these reports. Today's reports seem to be saying that China wanting to showcase how the area around this Scarborough Shoal is an, quote, excellent environmental condition. The context of it being, as you said, that China had effectively seized control of this area following a standoff with the Philippines in 2012. And the Philippines has said that China has limited its vessels from entering the area, even though China has previously said that in a goodwill agreement back in 2016, it has allowed a small number of fishing vessels from the Philippines to operate in the area. But here we see the report saying that there has been healthy coral reef systems, biodiversity flourishing. Now contrast that to Monday's report that was released in which China asserted that, in its words, the Philippines warship that has been, quote, illegally grounded there since 1999 has gravely damaged the coral reef system near the Second Thomas Shoal. Now, the other big question here is the timing of all this. Two reports in a week. I asked Chinese officials today whether this was timed and whether this was related the timing was coordinated, also given those tensions that we have been seeing in recent times. But this was how the official answered me.
我们在今年5到6月份到黄岩岛开展这种生态环境状况的一个现场调查，主要是因为每年5到6月份都是南海季风的转换期，受南海春季暖池的一个影响，海水的海表温度一般是比较高。那在这个阶段呢，南海珊瑚礁也是受到的热胁迫压力是比较大的。
Well, Mr. Lai, as we heard just there, that Chinese officials are not directly linking the timing of this, the release of these reports with the escalations that we have seen recently in the South China Sea. In fact, they are saying that this is part of their normal scheduled work. But what is your take on this? What do you make of the timing?
I think it's very significant because it comes
after the Philippine Coast Guard released satellite images and footages sometime in May, which they asserted, which showed that there was severe environmental degradation in terms of the marine life as well as waters surrounding the Scarborough shore. And in particular, in that report that was released, the Philippines highlighted the overfishing of giant clams, which is of particular concern to the Philippines because, as you mentioned, the year 2012, it was in 2012 that year that the Philippines authorities actually wanted to board and detain some Chinese fishermen for fishing, in their view, illegally in the area. And one of the catch of these Chinese fishermen was giant clams. So fast track to today, we are revisiting this issue. And therefore, I think that the timing of the reports released by the Chinese side, 2 reports in less than a week, is in my view, rather unusual.
So, so Mr. Lai, we hear that you're saying the timing is rather unusual. And at this point as well, they choose to focus on the environmental aspect at this point. So how do you see this fitting into its South China Sea strategy or its playbook?
I think in terms of the approach that I see, China is using various means or tools at its disposal to try to counter the Philippines. And in this case, the release of the 2 reports is intended to counter the Philippines' accusation that there is severe environmental degradation surrounding the Scarborough shore. And in one of the earlier reports, they pointed out that there is severe environmental degradation, in fact, in the waters surrounding the Sierra Madre, which is at the Second Thomas shore. And I noticed a difference in terms of the 2 reports in that for the report that pertains to Scarborough shore, they mentioned a factor, which is they address a factor of rising seawater temperatures. And the report concluded that rising seawater temperature, while it affected a few years, it did not affect seriously the growth of the corals. In other words, they're saying that the corals were able to show some degree of resilience in encountering the rising seawater levels. And the other point that they also mentioned is this natural predators, the crown of thorns starfish, which they highlighted in the report surrounding Scarborough shore. But these 2 factors, the crown of thorns starfish, as well as the point about the rising seawater temperatures, were not addressed in the report that they issued related to the Second Thomas shore.
Right. So, Olivia, we've heard there what Mr. Lai was going to the details of those reports. But in a nutshell, right? I mean, how much do you think that this report will actually move the needle in this ongoing dispute? And, I mean, does it make tensions worse?
Well, Telly, I think as Mr. Lai outlined that, both sides are pointing fingers at each other when it comes to environmental degradation. But I think what is also significant given the timing is that we have seen a recent escalation in tensions that many observers have said brings tensions in the disputed waters to the next level. And I'm talking about that incident back in mid-June, which saw weapons being used and a Filipino sailor having his thumb being severed following a skirmish clash between the 2 sides. Now, observers are saying that this took tensions to the next level. The concern really is whether this could evolve or escalate into a wider conflict. But when it comes to this environmental research and on this front and on this topic of damage to the waters and the disputed waters, we are also hearing from researchers that I've spoken to about tensions and brushes that they are having with the Filipino side. Have a listen.
我们刚到那里不到10分钟，他2艘橡皮艇就过来了，然后每个橡皮艇上大概有4个人到我们这儿，然后我们在我们那个调查区上面就高速的穿行，用他们橡皮艇干扰我们的作业因为我们本身是潜水作业，在上面穿行的话，对我们下面的人员在心理还身体上都会造成一定的压力对我们人身安全也造成危险。所以我们这次距离他很近的时候呢，他的反应会比较激烈，会感觉到他们明显感觉到他们非常紧张。我们想是不是可能会担心我们去找到说他们破坏这个生态的一个证据吧。
But at the same time, we have also seen other actions from China. We know that it's docked its largest Coast Guard vessel near the Scarborough Shoal over the weekend, dubbed the monster ship by the Philippines, also escalating tensions, even as we had seen high-level talks between China and the Philippines just last week, where both sides agreed to try and de-escalate tensions. So how all this will play out, observers are concerned that a small skirmish may turn into something bigger and more concerning for the region. Arteli.
Well, let's hope that's not going to happen. Well, thanks so very much to our correspondent, Livis Jong in Beijing, as well as Lai Liangfuk, Senior Fellow at the IC's Yusof Ishak Institute, for your insights. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up in East Asia tonight, a growing shortage of teachers across East Asia. Our correspondents Michio Ishida and Deborah Wong will be joining us to explain just what is pushing those in a profession to the brink. NATO poised to strengthen its ties with Indo-Pacific partners, including Japan and South Korea, as the group marks its 75th anniversary in Washington. A Chinese aircraft carrier reportedly passes near the Philippines, adding an unexpected dimension to tensions in the South China Sea. And torrential rains triggering record floods, landslides, and transport chaos across vast swathes of East Asia, even as Japan wilts under a heat wave and has claimed at least half a dozen lives. Japan, similar to its East Asian neighbors, is facing a growing shortage of school teachers. Fewer are applying for the job, while record numbers are taking time off or just simply quitting for mental health reasons. CNA's Michio Ishida finds out what's pushing teachers to the breaking point.
Classes have long ended at this public elementary school in Tokyo. But it's not unusual for the teachers to be working past 8 in the evening. Chiharu Kurayama is a homeroom teacher here at Shimoda Elementary School.
もともとは子供が好きで、幼稚園の先生か小学校の先生にいつかはなりたいなぐらいの気持ちで大学には入ったんですけど。
Her devotion to the children has kept her going for 18 years, despite the hours, workload, and high levels of stress that teachers in Japan face. Ms. Kurayama's day begins at 8 a.m. She teaches her first grade students almost all subjects with barely any breaks. Lunchtime is spent serving the children their meals. Lessons end at about 2 p.m. and then the children do their chores. On some days, Ms. Kurayama has to oversee school activities. If not, that's when she begins a mountain of miscellaneous tasks, from helping 6th grade teachers make graduation certificates to handling calls from unhappy parents. Her duties outside of the actual teaching pile up quickly.
教育だけに専念できる環境が整うと、授業の質も上がるし、先生たちももっと笑顔になるんじゃないかなと思います。いろんなプラスアルファの仕事がすごくたくさんあるので。
School teachers told me working overtime or more than 14 hours a day was not unusual for many years, but it hasn't been addressed as infringing on work-life balance. It's for one due to their commitment to their jobs, and also the high expectation the local community holds towards school teachers. A poll by Japan Teachers Union last year shows teachers in public schools put in an average of 96 hours of overtime a month, putting them at high risk of karoshi, or death from overwork. Regulations state that teachers cannot be forced to work overtime, but many feel pressured to do so.
耳が聞こえなくなったことがありましたね、一時期。片方だけ。もう本格的に聞こえなくなって病院かかって、一生懸命治療したのは1ヶ月半ぐらいですね。一緒に働いてる人たちが結構精神的にきつくなっていっちゃってお休みをされることが増えちゃって、その話を聞いたりとか、あとはその人たちのフォローをしたりとかするのでちょっとストレスがすごい溜まってたので。
Latest figures from Japan's Education Ministry show a record 12,192 public school teachers took leave due to mental illness in 2022, while another 953 resigned for the same reason in the 2021 academic year. The issue is causing a serious shortage of teachers. 64% of public elementary school teachers surveyed by a nonprofit education group say they are short-staffed. Former educator Kumi Sugaya, who quit in March, says she burnt out after a 4-year teaching career.
1ヶ月ぐらいちょっと体調悪かったんです。でもそれでもやっぱり担任って1人しかいないじゃないですか。だから行かなきゃいけなくて、それは結構メンタル的にもきつかったですね。休めない、やっぱ代わりがいないので。
Teachers in Japan face immense pressure to perform. Former educator Joji Miyazaki, who resigned last year, says he faced criticism from his own colleagues.
子どもたちの授業を授業見られて、あれがダメだこれがダメだ、授業を準備しなさい、授業を準備したものを見せなさい、で実際にやってみる、でもダメだねダメだしで、こう日々改善されない状態が続いて、ちょっとこれ辛いなと思って。
More than half of some 10,000 educators surveyed by Japanese think tank in 2022 say they would not recommend teaching as a career. To woo and retain teachers, some schools are cutting working hours, while authorities are looking at upping overtime allowances as well as other reforms. But for now, many youth are shunning the profession. There were only 1.1 applicants for each vacancy in Tokyo's public elementary schools this year, the lowest ever.
So just how profound is the problem of teacher burnout in East Asia? Well, let's hear it from our CNA correspondents, Deborah Wong in Shenzhen and Michio Ishida in Tokyo. Debs, we heard there from Michio's report just that Japanese teachers are at a breaking point. And I don't blame them. 96 hours of overtime a month, 14-hour day shifts, that is quite a stretch. But to help us understand, what is it like for teachers in China? Is it any better or worse?
Well, I would say, Otelli, the situation is quite comparable to what Japan is experiencing. You know, there was a survey done by state media and the National Institute of Education last November, and it found that a third of respondents report working more than 55 hours a week, and that is 11 hours more than the stipulated maximum work time of 44 hours a week under China's labor law. And in that same survey, 92% of respondents say they have overtime, they work overtime every day. So there is increasing pressure also because China recently reformed its national curriculum in recent years to make subjects harder, and there is pressure to perform. And so what that means is outside of lesson time, you know, teachers are also expected to conduct after school lessons, and on top of that, they also need to plan sports and arts activities, and they've also had to do a lot of administrative tasks. I think that's something similar that Michio reported about in her story earlier, and these are administrative tasks for official government inspection. So what teachers have to do is that they have to keep a record of everything. They have to present an analysis of their own lessons, their own colleagues' lessons as well. also what they are doing right to help their students succeed in exams. And, teachers have taken to social media platforms like Weibo, even Xiaohongshu, to complain about their workload, saying that they don't even have time to teach or to prepare for lessons. The very essence of what being a teacher means is in some way diluted in that sense. So quite similar to Japan.
Yeah, and all these administrative tasks, it all eats into your overtime, right? And I can see how all of that adds up. And actually, as a matter of fact, we've heard Japan is similar to China, and even in South Korea as well. Apparently, this time last year, tens of thousands of teachers across South Korea, they were protesting about student misbehavior, harassment even by the parents. So, Michio, then, we all know that, Japan and countries across East Asia has a very high and competitive education environment. So is it true then that also teachers are often held accountable for their students' performance and hence all that extra pressure?
Well, let me explain to you the Japanese education system. If a child goes to a public school, then it will have to be in the neighborhood of residence. Academic performance in the elementary school years doesn't really matter. Anyone can finish 9 years of education. It's compulsory and free. And no matter how bad your grades are, you don't flunk. But for those who want to advance to senior high school and to good senior high school, which is not compulsory, then your grades in junior high school matter. And as to whether teachers will be held accountable, well, based on my observation, it depends on the school principal. If the school principal wants to boost the standing of the school, he might pressure his staff and the teachers. So it's really up to the leadership of the school principal.
Right. Deborah, is it sort of similar in China, across Hong Kong as well? We know, that it has also a very high standard in order to do well in the exam. So how does the intense academic pressure, the high expectations in these schools impact the teachers' mental health?
Well, I think the first word that comes to everyone's mind when you think about academic stress in China is the very dreaded Gaokao, or college entrance exams. It's traditionally seen as a high-stakes exam because that could very well shape someone's future. China did ban private tuition in July 2021 for students below the age of 16, and there has not been any new licenses given out for academic tuition centers since then. And schools also had to reduce their daily homework because the government was pushing this out because they wanted to reduce the pressure on students and to basically restore education as a public good. But, ironically, that has in fact increased pressure on teachers because now the tutors are mostly gone. Some of them are also operating underground. There's even more pressure on teachers to step in to help the students achieve the same results so that they can perform well at the college entrance exams. And what that means is they've had to extend their after-class services or extra lessons, and then they have to go home to prepare for classes the next day and also to mark homework. That same year when that policy change took place, over 75% of Chinese teachers actually experience moderate to severe anxiety, while about 28% of middle school teachers have reported high risk of suffering depression. Yeah, sorry. So, Michio, I'm just curious to also find out, that is the academic situation that China and Hong Kong is facing. But in Japan, what kind of non-academic factors are there, have you seen, that's contributing to stress?
Well, I think really similar to what Deborah has mentioned about China. But in the case of public school teachers here that I've met also, they are employed by the Tokyo metropolitan government. So they need to handle administrative matters and report that to the metropolitan government. And they also need to keep an eye on children with special needs, plan for events, field trips. They might have to prepare handmade graduation certificates if the school is not willing to outsource the job because of a lack of a budget. What's really stressful seems to be dealing with complaints from parents,
so-called monster parents. That's a common term in Japan. They receive phone calls from them, and the phone calls can go on for longer than an hour. They have to attend faculty meetings. They have trainings, which one teacher said that it doesn't really address the real problems they face. Teachers don't have time to sit down and talk to each other privately and share their problems. And during COVID-19 pandemic, one school teacher realized many teachers needed to share their problems. So he actually started a forum of school teachers, and that seems to be helping, but, it's not everywhere. By the way, Deborah, we've seen China ramp up patriotic education in schools. Has that changed the way teachers operate?
I think very much so, Michio. That law was passed last October, and teachers, and essentially what that means is teachers in China, Hong Kong, and Macau, they're now required to include patriotic education in their curriculum. So they've already been doing so in the years leading up to this. Now, for instance, Hong Kong has made flag-raising ceremonies compulsory. And aside from conducting their own lessons, teachers now also need to conduct national education lessons. They got to set aside time for that. They must also plan field trips for students to China, because that is a requirement for students as well. And they must also be extra cautious of students' conduct, of their fellow teachers' conduct, especially when it comes to flag-raising ceremonies, because, there is a lot of emphasis on teachers to do that well. Now, for one example that happened in Hong Kong quite recently was that 2 Hong Kong schools that provide special education for children with intellectual disabilities, they were criticized by the government for not teaching the Chinese Constitution well, and also for not singing the anthem loud enough. So I raise this example just to show that there is additional emphasis placed on conduct. And because of that, teachers feel even more responsible. They feel that they are watched and scrutinized very carefully. So that also adds to the stress.
All right. And just to wrap things up, a question to you both, starting with Mitch first. I really feel for the teachers. So what sort of support systems are in place for those struggling with burnout in Japan? Mitch, you first, and then Deborah.
Well, for public school teachers in Tokyo, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government actually offers counseling. The Metropolitan Government on its website provides the number to call, email address to contact, and the dates when clinical psychologists will provide counseling at which locations. And separately, Tokyo started this mentorship system just this year at elementary schools. So a teacher close to the age of a new teacher will listen to his or her problems. You see, last fiscal year, the most number of newly hired public school teachers in Tokyo resigned since the Education Committee started to record the numbers from 2014. It's 169 teachers resigning in a year out of 3,472 newly hired. That's an increase 3 years in a row. And the top reason is due to so-called personal convenience. Well, that really meant was half of them were unwell.
Deborah, very quickly, what does China do for its teachers?
So in late 2019, the government issued guidelines to reduce teachers' workload by cutting down on inspections and social tasks by at least 50%. But according to personal accounts that we've seen on Weibo and Xiaohongshu, that has had little effect. A Chinese educator did an informal survey. It's an open WeChat account, and about 6,000 educators responded. And almost all of them said that the tasks still take about 90% of their non-teaching hours. So I think whatever reforms there have been in reality on the ground, teachers are still feeling the stress. They are still feeling burnt out. And so they can only go to social media to seek support from their own community.
Well, thanks so very much for touching on these topics with us, Michio Ishida in Tokyo and Deborah Wong in Shenzhen. And we are continuing our education coverage tomorrow, pivoting to South Korea, where we'll delve into the impact of new laws enacted after the suicide of a teacher aimed at protecting educators from abusive students and parents. And coming up on East Asia tonight,
the fact that Indo-Pacific partners have voiced, and not only voiced, but also practically supported Ukraine, that they understand that Ukraine is to some extent litmus test for everyone in the world.
A conversation with Latvia's president on security and defense, with a focus on the hot button issue of Ukraine's war against Russia. Torrential rains are battering many parts of East Asia this summer. The record deluge is triggering floods and landslide, as well as disrupting many transport links. Well, the incessant rains have left at least 130 people trapped in a remote Tibetan town located near China's border with Nepal. Some tourists are among those stranded in a storm. Rescuers have evacuated about 340 people so far, but operations are being hampered as parts of a major highway connected to the town have been washed away or are blocked by landslides. The continuous rains are also posing a challenge to rescue efforts. Authorities are warning that the storms are expected to last until tomorrow. Over in South Korea, some regions experienced torrential rains. At least 5 people have died due to the heavy downpours, and 1 remain missing. Residents in parts of the country are wading through waist-deep waters. Rivers have overflowed and roads are inundated with water. Train operators have suspended some services in affected areas in the south. Well, the rainy season is also bearing down on Japan as it swelters through a heat wave. Weather officials are warning of torrential rains in the northwest and the east. Rains are expected to last until Friday. Well, the Met Agency is urging caution against flooding for residents in low-lying areas. But in other parts, hot and humid conditions have claimed the lives of at least 6 people. Temperatures in some areas have soared to above the 35 degrees Celsius threshold, which weather officials have classified as extremely hot. Well, earlier in East Asia tonight, we touched on how security alliance NATO is set to strengthen ties with Indo-Pacific partners. That, according to observers, is a move countering China's growing influence. While CNA's Caroline Malone caught up with Latvian President Edgars Rinkēvičs on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Washington, and she asked him about the deepening relations and the bloc's concerns over a so-called no-limits partnership between Russia and China.
How about concern over China? Increasingly, we hear NATO allies speaking about the support that China is giving to Russia. There are Indo-Pacific allies of NATO who are going to be present later this week in Washington, D.C., among them South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. What kind of cooperation would you like to see with those allies and NATO?
I think this is already good tradition because already in 2022, during Madrid summit, there was a special session with our Indo-Pacific partners. And we were discussing a lot of issues that we have in common and a common interest. It's, of course, currently very difficult to make any prediction how the geopolitical situation is going to develop in about a year or so. But I think that the fact that Indo-Pacific partners have voiced, and not only voiced, but also practically supported Ukraine, that they understand that Ukraine is to some extent litmus test for everyone in the world. And if countries that are revisionists do believe that they can get away with launching the war, grabbing the territory, committing all those atrocities, then of course the international law and order as we know it is going to disappear. And I think that this is something that we do understand. China is of course a very important country when it comes to global order. It is a very important country also, and unfortunately we don't see that it is using its influence to stop the war in Ukraine, because I do believe that if there would be a very strong message from China to Russia, stop it, if there wouldn't be any kind of support that Russia is getting, most probably Russia would not be able to continue the war. I think that we would be ending, or that war already would have ended months or even we can now say years ago. Fortunately, we don't see that. And from that point of view, I think that we should treat China as a very serious global actor. We need to work with them, but we also need to forge a very good working relationship, and I think that we are on the way with those countries in the region that share our values, share our attitude to the global order. So it's not an easy task.
And that's East Asia Tonight this Wednesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia and CNA 938 Radio. Thanks for watching.